FNAF Secret of the Mimic player revealed. So recently, the very first trailer was released for Secret of the Mimic, and in it we can see glimpses of gameplays. I have my own thoughts / predictions on who we are playing as in the game. Here it goes. There's currently 2 robot engineers in the very same universe, Henry and Edwin. As we can hear from the very beginning of the trailer, Edwin does exist in the game lore as well, since he is mentioned by Hand Unit to have gone missing.
One of our contractors, Edwin Murray, has gone missing.
This means that we indeed have 2 metal worker geniuses. Whether you believe in Tales games or not, I still think the books are non-canon. The story seems to be paralleling themselves. In the 6th Pizzaplex book Nexi, we learn that Edwin made the Mimic for his son David to play with. Afterwards, David is hit by a car and dies, but despite his death, the Mimic continues to mimic him after his death. Edwin gets super devastated about this loss, and with his grief, he tries to destroy the Mimic, only for the Mimic to mimic his violent behavior. After this event, Edwin disappears, which leaves some of Fazbear's property abandoned at his warehouse. This is where the game Secret of the Mimic comes in. Now, we do not know fully if Game Edwin also has a son and if that is his motive for abandoning his factory. But in either way, we know that he goes missing and that Fazbear's, just like in the books, tries to retrieve his prototype, likely the Mimic. We also know that from the books, multiple teams were sent out to retrieve the Mimic, only for them to get killed and never return. However, as our gameplay most likely goes, we, just like in the books, will probably end up retrieving the Mimic, since our character from the trailer wears gloves and is capable of loads of engineering things. Like, look at this dude. He's most likely more skilled than the other employees and capable of retrieving high technology. The only other characters in the games, except for Edwin, that is very much robotic skilled is in fact Henry. My suggestion is therefore Henry being the player. In the books Silver Eyes, we learned that Henry and William were business partners and that Henry was more of the creative one and Afton was more of the owner, handling the business. And even if you think Henry is still also a businessman, which he probably would have been around the later times at FNAF 6, we can still see his origins as a normal Fazbear employee. This is not the only time when Afton has been portrayed as the owner of Freddy's, while Henry is the metal worker. In the FNAF movie, William as Steve Raglan mentions how the pizza was shut down for years and that the owner is not ready to let it go yet.
The owner's just not ready to let it go yet.
This quote downright tells us that Afton is the full-on owner, while Henry, at least around the 80s, is still just a close partner to William and Freddy's genius. I know that Henry is portrayed as the co-founder of Fredbear's Family Diner. We see this in the Freddy files, but have the games really told us the same thing? We only know that Book Henry was the co-founder, but in the games we don't actually learn that. And if Henry really was a normal employee, this scene would make sense. Henry, who is a normal Faz employee, manages to, against all odds, to retrieve the Mimic with his robotic skills, and since Fazbears have tried to retrieve the Mimic multiple times, failing each time, Henry would probably be very hailed by Afton as a hero. This might actually be the very start of their friendship as business partners, as Henry, after the event of Secret of the Mimic, comes closer and closer to Afton for his hard genius work, replacing Edwin, who'd gone missing. Therefore, Henry takes over the new robot genius at Fazbears and would stay close to the brand. Don't get me wrong, I can still see Henry as the co-founder of Fazbears, but having him as the player would make the story more satisfying. In this case, he will become one of the owners after Secret of the Mimic. There's even more evidence coming all the way from both FNAF 6 and Ruin together. You see, in the very beginning of FNAF 6, we learn from Hand Unit whatever you just purchased might be hiding, and that it wants to get out for months now.
Aside from the daily risk of lawsuits, there's also the risk that something might be hiding inside whatever you just purchased with that steeply discounted price tag. Of course, that would only be a serious danger if there were something outside that's been trying to get in for months now, which we are not confirming to be the case.
This quote to me screams the Mimic, as he, in Ruin, is revealed to be sealed up inside the pizza place from FNAF 6. I know that Hand Unit says that Stuffs wants to get in and not out, but maybe, just maybe, this might be a cool detail that told us about the Mimic's origins all along. Of course, he might just be talking about the other scrapped animatronics, but this was just a fun detail that I noticed. The message comes from Hand Unit and not Henry. However, this message can still be sent by Henry through the Hand Unit voice, since it's likely Henry who created these commercials for the newly rebranded Freddy's. And also, the Hand Unit voice has been reused a lot by Fazbear Entertainment, all the way back at the 70s from Secret of the Mimic to the Mega Pizzaplex, which doesn't make Henry's message feel strange enough by him using someone else's voice. But But why did Henry seal the Mimic and not burn it down among the other animatronics? Yeah, I know, but think of it. We know that a fire erupted at Fall Fest and that an animatronic went rogue. The animatronic isn't revealed, though it might be the Mimic. If the fire is likely to be revealed in Secret of the Mimic, which again comes out on a Friday the 13th, so there might be a possibility to that, and that Henry is the player, as I'm suggesting, Henry would know all along that the Mimic somehow escapes fire. And since the Mimic isn't Henry's creation, nor the mascot suits from Ruin, he therefore decides to, at least from 1979, seal them all deep below the Pizzaplex, instead of burning it down along with his other creations. Fun fact is also that Henry is theorized to have sealed in Afton at FNAF 1's Pizzeria after his death during the Follow Me minigames, so this might not be the first time when we see Henry locking up stuffs inside rooms. But doesn't Fall Fest take place in 1970 and not 1979? Wouldn't that make it impossible for Henry to even know about the Mimic's ability to survive fire? Well, we also know that another Fall Fest takes place at 1983 thanks to Help Wanted's DLC The Curse of Dreadbur. This might imply that multiple Fall Fests has been around each year from at least 1970 to 1983, and since Secret of the Mimic likely takes place in 1979, this would actually make it possible for the fire to occur during our, or Henry's, gameplay, him retrieving the Mimic of course. We don't know if Game Edwin dies in 1979 or if he, just like Book Edwin, returns about 40 years later at the times of modern FNAF. Even if he does come back, it doesn't contradict anything. If Henry dies 30 years after FNAF 1 and that Edwin returns 40 years later, the timeline can still make sense. Edwin disappears only for Henry to take his place at the 80s. Then after Henry's death in FNAF 6, either Edwin or his Mimic returns and begins to run the whole Pizzaplex like nothing ever happened. Edwin makes a robot Mimic for his child David to entertain with, only for it to mimic him after his death, which causes Edwin to tearish it down. This scene mirrors a lot like what we see with Henry from the fourth closet making a doll named Ella for his child Charlie, only for it too to be the key on recreating his beloved daughter through 4 different Charlie robots. Just like Edwin, Henry rages out and destroys the 4th Charlie robot. And about Charlie's and David's death, they seem very similar. Well, sort of. David is hit by a car, while Charlie, at least in the games, is killed by William, who also drove some kind of a car. And this evidence comes from both security puppet and also the Save Him minigame from FNAF 2. But this parallel raises one question. Why does Henry replicate Edwin's actions by doing a robot then destroying it? Well, I guess that if Henry replaced Edwin, it would kinda make sense for him, or makes it symbolic at least, for him to mimic his predecessor on destroying his creation that reminded him of his deceased child. Some suggest that Afton might be the player since he also has robotic expertise from Sister Location. I can agree with this theory, although I also think it's the least likeliest. If Afton truly is the owner from the very start, as I'm suggesting, then it would be weird for him to handle the hard work by himself. That is, the hard work on retrieving the Mimic. If he is, at the time of Secret of the Mimic, being very high up in the business, this position as being a fast employee wouldn't really fit him well. And another thing that depicts Afton as having less expertise in robots compared to Henry is that he steals creations from others. Just like what both FNAF and the Silvereye suggest, it is heavily believed that the 4th Charlie bot was stolen by Afton in order to become Circus Baby. Just like in Secret of the Mimic's case, the owner, probably Afton, now steals another creation from another robot engineer named Edwin, his Mimic. Another thing that tells us that Edwin is not the player is that it would be somehow weird for him to first disappear and afterwards return to retrieve his creations to Freddy's. To me, Edwin would probably be handling the Mimic by himself. This play suggestion to Secret of the Mimic is therefore the least likeliest. But is Henry really the one that seals the Mimic? Don't we see Gregory and Vanessa seal it with the MX's program from the Help Wanted update? Yeah, that is a good question to my theory, and we know that they drives around in a van that is similar to Security Breach van from one of the good endings. But not to be confused, yes, it is probably Henry who takes the MX's program to keep the Mimic stuck, but it is only because sometime after FNAF 6, the Mimic now runs the Pizzaplex. All in all, I believe we will play as Henry, who compared to previous teams manages to retrieve the Mimic with his engineering skills, only for him to get hailed as a hero by the owner Afton. Henry therefore comes closer to business with Afton and replaces Edwin as Fazbear's robotic genius. Sometime in Secret of the Mimic, a fire occurs and Henry sees how the Mimic survives. Then afterward, Henry supposedly seals the Mimic at the pizza place since he knows all along that the Mimic is dangerous and can sustain fire. Later on, it run the Mega Pizzaplex. But hey, this is my prediction and I might be completely wrong. But remember, this is just a theory. Share this video if you want, like it, and if not even better, subscribe. But that's it for me. Thanks for listening.